This happened back in 2019 when I was 21 years old. I was spending the summer at my parents' place, and one afternoon I got the urge to camp out in the woods behind their house. It wasn't planned at all. I just woke up that morning, packed a bag, and decided I'd spend the night out there. I'd camped in those woods plenty of times growing up, so it didn't feel risky or exciting, just familiar. I told my parents where I was going and left around 4 in the afternoon, giving myself time to find a decent spot before dark. After walking for about an hour, I found a small clearing that felt right. I cleared away some debris, set up my tent, and started a modest campfire. As the sun slowly dropped behind the trees, everything felt perfect, quiet, peaceful, exactly what I needed. That calm didn't last long. Just as the sun was nearing the treetops, I heard a voice. A man's voice. It sounded low, like muttering, but it echoed strangely, making it hard to tell where it was coming from. The shadows were growing longer, and the thick trees made visibility terrible. These woods were large and mostly untouched. No trails, no reason for anyone else to be out there. Running into someone felt extremely unlikely. At first, I assumed whoever it was would keep moving. But the voice didn't fade. It lingered for several minutes, long enough that it started to feel intentional, like they weren't passing through, but staying nearby. Eventually, I called out, shouting a simple hello. Before I could even finish the word, the voice stopped. The forest went completely silent. That silence made my skin crawl. I called out again. Nothing. With only a short window of daylight left, I decided it wasn't worth staying there. I packed up quickly and moved deeper into the woods, hoping to find another place to camp before night fully set in. I wasn't lucky. After 15 minutes of searching and watching the light disappear, I gave up and settled between the trees wherever I could. By the time my tent was up, darkness had taken over completely. Oddly enough, the quiet helped calm me. I figured I'd hear anyone coming long before they reached me. I rebuilt my fire and sat there for hours, eating snacks and making s'mores. Roasting marshmallows has always been comforting to me. It helped push my earlier unease out of my mind. Eventually, the fire began to dim, glowing softly rather than burning bright. That's when I heard it, leaves crunching behind me. It sounded like it came from somewhere back and to my left. I turned, but the darkness swallowed everything. Whatever made the noise stopped the moment I looked. I called out again, expecting no response. A few seconds later, a man stepped into the firelight. He startled me, not because he appeared, but because he came from a direction I hadn't been watching. He smiled casually and said, "Didn't mean to scare you," before walking right up and sitting beside my fire like he belonged there. He held his hands out toward the warmth, completely relaxed. I asked him what he wanted and told him he had the wrong campsite. He simply said, "No." I didn't know what he meant by that, and the way he said it made my stomach tighten. We sat there in an unbearable silence, the fire crackling between us. Trying to break the tension, I asked him if he'd been the one talking near my earlier campsite. He didn't look at me. He just stared into the flames, and whatever expression he'd had disappeared. "Must have been someone else," he said flatly. Before I could think of what to do next, a stick snapped behind me, again from the back left of the campsite. My heart dropped. He wasn't alone. When I turned back to the man by the fire, he was staring straight at me. I don't remember his expression clearly, only the emptiness in his eyes. Cold, lifeless. I didn't hesitate. I jumped up and ran. As I tore through the woods, I heard one of them shout something to the other, followed by footsteps chasing me. But I knew these woods better than they did. I kept moving, deeper into the darkness, until the sounds faded behind me. I followed the familiar terrain until I reached the road, then made it back to my parents' house. They called the police immediately. The next morning, I led officers back to where I'd been camping. Everything was gone. The tent, the fire pit, My belongings. I still don't know whether that's comforting or terrifying. Maybe they only wanted to steal from me. Or maybe they wanted something far worse, and I got away just in time. I never went back into those woods again. This happened while I was driving from northern Montana all the way up to Alaska. I'd converted my SUV into a basic camper and planned to spend nearly 2 months on the road. The entire purpose of the trip was to experience the Alaska highway from start to finish. That road has a reputation for a reason. Once you're on it, civilization thins out fast. Long stretches of wilderness, rough pavement, and very few services. I knew that going in, so I prepared as thoroughly as I could. Still, there was one thing that made me feel exposed from the start. Because I'd be crossing through Canada, I couldn't bring any kind of firearm with me. Normally, I always kept one in my vehicle for emergencies, especially when traveling alone. But for this trip, that wasn't an option, and the thought stayed in the back of my mind the entire time. The first day went smoothly. I put in about 8 hours of driving, and while the road was remote, it wasn't yet at its worst. The next section was far more isolated, with fuel stops spaced hundreds of miles apart. From that point on, I stopped for gas every chance I got and drove carefully. By the time the sun started setting, I was exhausted. I pulled into the first camping area I came across. Along that highway, there are official rest stops, but there are also countless unmarked pull-offs leading to small wooded campsites. Those were always my preference. It was late, and I didn't explore much. The spot was surrounded by forest, completely empty and quiet. I put up my window shades, climbed into the back, and fell asleep almost immediately. The night passed without incident. In the morning, before getting back on the road, I wanted to stretch my legs. As soon as I stepped outside, I noticed a narrow trail and decided to follow it. After only a few minutes of walking, it opened up into another campsite. Something about it felt wrong instantly. The area looked disturbed, like someone had packed up in a hurry. Some gear was missing entirely, while the rest was damaged and scattered around. It didn't look abandoned in the usual sense. It looked interrupted. I didn't stay long. 30 seconds was enough. I turned around and headed back toward my vehicle, trusting the uneasy feeling in my gut. When I reached my car, my stomach dropped. A black pickup truck was now parked right next to it. The windows were heavily tinted, and no one was outside. I had no idea if someone was sitting inside watching me. Between the wrecked campsite and the sudden appearance of that truck in such a remote area, I didn't hesitate. I got in and left immediately. I drove for several hours straight before stopping again, finally reaching a small gas station. It looked old and worn down, with a single pump and no other cars around. I started filling up and took in the scenery. Mountains in every direction, endless wilderness. After a few minutes, a truck appeared in the distance. As it got closer, I felt a tightening in my chest. It was the same black pickup. They pulled in beside me, parking at the other side of the pump. Logically, it made sense. Everyone had to refuel here. But it didn't explain why they'd left that campsite shortly after I did. What made it worse was that I never saw the driver. No door opened. No one stepped out. The truck just sat there. As soon as my tank was full, I got back in and drove off. I felt relieved knowing I'd have enough fuel to put serious distance between us. My plan was to find my next camping spot early, while there was still daylight. Later that evening, I found a hidden pull-off tucked into thick brush. There were no signs anyone had been there recently, and it felt far safer than the previous night. I thought about setting up a tent, but decided against it. Something told me staying inside the vehicle was the better choice. I cooked, enjoyed the quiet, and climbed back into the SUV once it got dark. The next day was supposed to be an easier drive, and I felt good knowing Alaska was finally close. I stayed up watching videos on my phone, relaxed and comfortable. That lasted until around 11 p.m. I heard footsteps outside my car. Not an animal, a person. The sound of dry leaves and snapping twigs made it unmistakable. I sat up quickly, but I was too late. A man's face was pressed against the side window, staring directly at me. I barely made out his features, but there was no doubt what I was seeing. I recoiled in shock, gasping for air. He pulled back instantly, vanishing into the darkness beyond the glass. I scrambled into the front seat just as another figure ran toward the vehicle. The back window shattered. My hands were shaking so badly it was hard to start the car. One man was rushing toward the driver's side while the other reached through the broken window, trying to unlock the door from inside. Somehow, I got the engine started just as the back door swung open. I slammed the gas. As I sped away, headlights briefly illuminated a black pickup parked off the trail, partially hidden in the bushes. They'd followed me the entire way. I drove until I felt far enough away to stop and shut the back door, which was still hanging open. With barely any signal, I managed to contact the police. By the time help could have arrived, the men were long gone. I never got a license plate. I never saw their faces clearly. After replacing the broken window, I continued on to Alaska and finished my trip. But what those men intended to do, breaking into a car in the middle of nowhere, knowing someone was inside, is something I don't allow myself to dwell on. Some questions are better left unanswered. I planned the trip in the middle of summer, when the heat made the forest feel alive. Hiking had always been my escape, and that's when I heard about old fire lookout towers you could rent. They were abandoned decades ago, hidden miles deep in the wilderness. I searched until I found the most isolated one available. Open all summer, far from any roads. There was only one blurry photo online, old enough to tell me nothing. I packed my gear and started hiking at 9 in the morning, not knowing what I was walking toward. For hours, there was nothing but dense forest, the trail slowly fading into nothing. 5 hours in, I finally saw the lookout, small and distant at the top of a mountain. It looked more like a raised cabin than a tower, old and worn down by time. Another hour passed before I reached it, and the view made everything feel worth it. The structure itself told a different story. Cracked wood, patched repairs, and no locks. Inside, the lookout was completely empty, just bare floors and windows on every wall. I ate, watched the sun disappear, and listened to the forest fall silent. When night came, I laid out my sleeping gear, exhausted but unable to sleep. 30 minutes passed. Then I heard footsteps. They weren't far away. They were climbing the stairs. I rushed to the door as a man stepped inside. Middle-aged, long blonde hair, calm expression. What scared me most was that he wasn't surprised, as if he knew I was already there. He smiled and said it was a great place to stay, like we were old friends. I told him I had rented it for several nights, trying to hide how nervous I felt. That's when he said he was hoping to stay there too, even though nothing else existed for miles. When he suggested sharing the space, I lied and said a friend was on the way. His smile vanished instantly, and after a long pause, he turned to leave. As he walked down the stairs, I realized he carried no backpack, no supplies. I stayed awake long after he was gone, watching the dark forest below. The next morning felt normal, until I found a note tied to the railing. It had only one word written on it. Sorry, with a smiley face. He had come back while I was asleep, and the thought made my stomach drop. That night, I stayed awake even longer, a lantern glowing softly behind me. Near midnight, I stepped outside for a moment and saw movement at the edge of the trees. I called out into the darkness, but nothing answered me. I ran back inside, knowing anyone out there could see me clearly. I began packing my bag, checking the stairs every few seconds. Then I saw him, standing at the bottom step. He didn't move, He just waited. After what felt like forever, he stepped back and vanished into the forest. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my bag and left. Knife in hand, I walked into pitch-black wilderness. Every sound felt close. Every shadow felt wrong. I didn't stop walking until morning, until the forest finally released me. One thought still haunts me. I told them I'd be there for 3 nights. If I had stayed longer, I don't think I would have survived it.